The sound of crunching wood and shattering glass yanked me out of my Saturday morning coffee like a slap to the face. I rushed out the front door barefoot, heart pounding, coffee mug still in hand, and there it was. My porch. My beautiful, hand-stained cedar porch, the one I built with my own 2 hands last summer, now mangled like a crumpled soda can under the back end of a pearl-white Ford F-250. And standing beside it, arms crossed and sunglasses perched on her bleach-blonde head like a crown of entitlement, was none other than Gloria Zimmerman, our HOA president. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, not even glancing at the wreckage. "It's just a porch." I blinked. "You backed your truck into my house, Gloria." She rolled her eyes like I'd just accused her of arson. "It's not your house, Nathan. It's part of the community. And maybe if you didn't build unapproved modifications." "It was approved 3 months ago," I snapped. "I've got the letter from the architectural committee." She waved a manicured hand through the air like she was swatting away a fly. "We'll see about that. Either way, I'm not paying for it." "You shouldn't have put it so close to the property line." I stared at her, stunned. There was 10 feet of yard between the porch and the boundary fence. She'd backed clear across half my lawn. "I'm calling the police," I said. She laughed a sharp, nasal bark. "Oh, please. I am the HOA. You really think a little accident is going to change anything?" That's when I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because Gloria Zimmerman had no idea I'd gone to law school. Sure, I'd left the courtroom for a quieter life as a freelance consultant, but I still knew the ropes. And I always kept a folder of HOA correspondence, approvals, and neighborhood camera footage. Just in case. I went inside, called the sheriff's non-emergency line, then dialed someone else, my old law school buddy, Felix. He picked up on the second ring. "Felix, I've got a situation," I said. "An HOA president, a Ford truck, and half a porch. You interested?" He let out a low whistle. "You had me at HOA president." By the time the deputy arrived, Gloria had already started spinning her tale. She told him I built an illegal structure, that my porch jutted into community space, that her truck had slipped because of uneven pavement, anything to make herself the victim. But the deputy, a young guy with a no-nonsense stare, took one look at the tire tracks in my lawn and shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "you reversed 20 feet into his yard, knocked over 2 planters, and destroyed part of his house." Gloria scoffed. "That porch wasn't approved." I handed the deputy a folder. Signed approval. Dated 3 months ago. Here's the HOA's letterhead. And this, I flipped to the next page, is the camera footage from my doorbell cam. Shows her backing up, no obstacles, no slip. Just a lot of speed and 0 brains. That shut her up for a second. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "I'm gonna need to see your license and insurance." "Oh, come on," she snapped. "We're neighbors. You really think he's going to press charges over a couple of boards?" I looked her dead in the eye. Yes, I absolutely am." She glared at me, nostrils flaring. "This is harassment." "No," I said, "this is property damage." "And you're on camera." The deputy took her information and handed me a case number. Gloria stormed off, heels clacking across the pavement, muttering something about ungrateful men and entitled renters. I wasn't even renting. That night, I emailed Felix everything: photos, footage, HOA documents, even the insurance info from the report. He responded with a single sentence. "They're going to wish they never scratched that truck." 2 days later, Gloria and her HOA cronies came knocking. Literally. 3 of them: Gloria, her best friend Meryl, who I'm convinced was born clutching a clipboard, and some guy named Todd who never speaks unless he's reading from the HOA charter, stood on my front steps like they were staging an intervention. "We've decided to fine you," Gloria announced. "For what?" I asked. "For violating the community aesthetic with an unapproved porch and for aggressive behavior toward an HOA board member." I laughed. "You mean when your truck destroyed my property and I called the cops?" Meryl stepped forward with a smug grin. "Your porch was never reviewed by the full board. Only the subcommittee." I held up the approval letter. "You mean this one? Signed by the chair, treasurer, and secretary? That's 3 out of 5 board members. That is a majority." Todd blinked. "Technically, that does qualify under." Gloria elbowed him. "You'll be receiving a formal fine in the mail," she snapped. $500. "Actually," I said, "you'll be receiving a formal lawsuit. For property damage, defamation, and attempted fraud." She froze. "What?" "And I've already filed a claim with your insurance," I added. They're sending an adjuster tomorrow. Hope your premiums are paid up. Her mouth opened, then closed. Meryl looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. You can't sue the HOA. Gloria finally blurted out. I grinned. I'm not suing the HOA. I'm suing you, Gloria, personally, for ramming your truck into my house and then trying to cover it up with fake fines. They left shortly after that. Gloria tried to slam the gate on the way out, but it bounced back and hit Meryl in the knee. Small victories. The next morning, I sat on my destroyed porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched a very confused insurance adjuster circle Gloria's truck. He kept taking notes, shaking his head, and asking her the same question over and over. Why were you backing up so fast on someone else's lawn? She didn't have a good answer. I didn't need one. I already had everything. And now I was playing offense. By Thursday morning, the adjuster's report landed on Gloria's lap like a brick through a stained glass window. I didn't see it, but I heard about it through the grapevine, specifically from my neighbor Randy, who worked at the local body shop and had just serviced Gloria's F-250. She tried to tell me the damage came from a fallen tree limb, he said, wiping grease off his hands while leaning against my mailbox. But the tailgates crushed inward. Didn't take a genius to figure out she hit something solid. I told her, ma'am, unless that tree limb was made of concrete and weighed 1,000 pounds, you're not fooling anyone. I thanked him, then went back to my laptop. Felix had already drafted the initial complaint for small claims court. But we weren't stopping there. Gloria had filed a fraudulent fine, made a false claim to her insurance company, and trespassed on private property. That last one stuck with Felix. He said he had a few friends at the county prosecutor's office who'd be interested. That afternoon, I got a call from Officer Delgado, the deputy who'd responded the day of the crash. Mr. Weller, do you have a few minutes? He asked. Sure. Something wrong. Depends on how you look at it. We received a tip from the insurance company. They flagged Gloria Zimmerman's statement as intentionally misleading. Said her account doesn't match the footage you provided or the physical evidence on her vehicle. I leaned back in my chair. So what happens now? We're opening an investigation into insurance fraud. Might escalate to criminal charges, depending on what the DA thinks. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. I thanked him and hung up. Things were moving faster than I expected. I hadn't even poured the new concrete footings yet, and already Gloria might be looking at charges. That evening, as I was sketching out a new deck design on my back patio, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Janice from 3 houses down. She was one of the quieter residents, a retired nurse who mostly kept to herself. I hadn't spoken to her much beyond the occasional wave. I heard about what she did to your porch, she said, her voice low and careful. I wanted to tell you something. I've been saving copies of the HOA newsletters for the past 2 years. Some of the ones Gloria edited before mailing them out. They were different from the originals. My pen froze mid-sketch. Different how? She rewrote sections. Find people for violations that didn't exist. Changed the language on rule amendments that never passed. I didn't say anything because, well, she made it real clear she didn't like people asking questions. Do you still have them? I do. Originals and the mailed versions. I can drop them off tomorrow. I told her I'd be home all day. When I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the rough outline of a new cedar deck. Gloria had been cooking the books. And if she'd tampered with official HOA documents, that was more than a petty spat over a porch. That was fraud. And with Janice's help, I could prove it. The next morning, Janice showed up with a brown accordion folder thick enough to choke a file cabinet. She handed it to me without a word, then nodded once and walked back down the sidewalk. I flipped it open and scanned. There it was, side-by-side newsletters. The originals had committee meeting minutes that showed votes never held. One bulletin showed a past motion banning solar panels. But the real version had it defeated 3-2. Another fine for a non-compliant mailbox turned out to be based on a regulation that didn't even exist in the community charter. I forwarded everything to Felix. He called me 20 minutes later. This isn't just a civil case anymore, he said. This is document tampering. If she mailed these, that's mail fraud. And if she used her position to collect money based on fake regulations, that's embezzlement. My pulse quickened. Think the DA will bite? They'll devour it. Especially if we can get others to testify. I spent the next few days knocking on doors, one neighbor at a time. I didn't lead with accusations. I just asked them about fines, notices, rule changes. Turns out, Gloria had a pattern targeting people who didn't attend HOA meetings, folks who were new to the neighborhood, or those who'd spoken up against her in the past. Marcus, an Army vet 2 blocks over, told me she'd find him for unauthorized fencing after he installed a privacy screen in his backyard 10 feet inside his property line. I asked for the rule, and she just said it was in the supplemental amendments. Never showed me a copy, he said. I paid it just to avoid the hassle. I asked if he'd be willing to talk to Felix. He nodded without hesitation. Gloria must have caught wind of what I was doing, because the flyers started showing up the next day. Bright red print, slipped under every door. Beware of misinformation. A disgruntled homeowner is spreading lies and may be attempting to dismantle our community integrity. The HOA board stands strong and united. Your cooperation in reporting any suspicious behavior will be appreciated. I laughed when I read it. She didn't name me, but I might as well have signed it myself. Then came the surprise audit. On Monday, a woman in a blue pantsuit and a clipboard knocked on my door. She introduced herself as Denise from the County Housing Oversight Committee. We received a complaint about irregularities in the Oak Ridge HOA filings, she said. Would you be willing to speak with us? I let her in, handed her the folder Janice had given me, and offered her coffee. She declined, but thanked me for the documentation. We've had our eyes on Oak Ridge since last year, she admitted. Multiple residents have submitted complaints, but nothing concrete until now. This fills in a lot of gaps. She stayed for an hour, asking detailed questions. Before she left, she paused at the door. By the way, she said, we've seen these strong HOA boards before. They don't tend to stay strong for long. By the end of the week, Gloria had a certified letter taped to her door. It was from the county auditor's office. A full investigation into the HOA's financial practices was underway, and Gloria had been instructed to produce all financial records from the past 5 years. She ignored it. Bad move. 2 days later, she got another letter, this one from the district attorney's office. Failure to cooperate would result in a subpoena, and if any funds were missing or misappropriated, criminal charges would follow. I saw her pacing in her front yard that night, phone clamped to her ear, gesturing wildly at her gardenias. Her husband, who I'd never seen speak louder than a whisper, was standing 10 feet away with his arms crossed. He didn't look sympathetic. I stayed out of it. For now. But the next morning, I got a call from Felix. She hired an attorney, he said. Good. That means she's scared. She should be. You ready to file the civil suit? I looked out at the mess where my porch used to be. A new shipment of cedar planks had just arrived, stacked neatly beside my driveway. Let's do it. He filed that afternoon. Property damage, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We attached witness affidavits, the adjuster's report, the video footage, and Janice's documents. Gloria's lawyer tried to settle. Offered to pay for the porch repairs if I dropped the suit. I told Felix we weren't interested. He agreed. This isn't about the porch anymore. It's about exposing the whole rotten foundation. Gloria had no idea her empire was crumbling beneath her. But the cracks were spreading fast, and the whole neighborhood was watching. The following Wednesday, a city building inspector wearing a windbreaker and a clipboard showed up on my driveway without warning. His name was Calvin, and his expression was carved from stone. I received a request for a structural compliance check on your property, he said, eyeing the freshly delivered cedar planks stacked beside my house. Specifically, the porch and rear deck area. I frowned. That's odd. I haven't started rebuilding anything yet. He adjusted his glasses. The complaint alleges you're using unlicensed contractors and unapproved materials. I raised an eyebrow. There's no work being done. That pile's just lumber. Haven't even touched it. He glanced at the paperwork in his hand, then looked back at the house. Mind if I take a quick walk around the property? I motioned toward the backyard. Be my guest. You'll see it's exactly as the permit office has on file. He took 15 minutes. When he returned, he shook his head. Nothing out of order. Everything matches the plans on record. But the fact that this complaint came in anonymously and flagged so many code violations that don't exist. He trailed off. Let me guess, I said. The name on the complaint wasn't anonymous to you. He didn't confirm. He didn't have to. Do you get many of these from Oak Ridge? I asked. He shrugged. Let's just say your HOA president has a reputation. But submitting false complaints to a city office? That's a little more serious. I'm filing a counter report. After he left, I called Felix to let him know. He was in the middle of preparing for a deposition with another resident who'd agreed to testify about years of shady practices. But this new development got his full attention. She filed a fraudulent report with a government agency, he said. That's a Class A misdemeanor, potentially more if it's part of a pattern. Calvin said it's not the first time. I replied. City's opening a counter-investigation. Felix's tone sharpened. Keep documenting. If they dig into her HOA correspondence and find she's been using her position to initiate bogus city actions, we may be looking at abuse of authority charges. By Friday, the neighborhood had shifted. More residents were approaching me in their yards, leaning over fences, flagging me down during walks. Most of them shared the same story: unexplained fines, blocked maintenance requests, or mysterious rule changes that never matched their copies of the charter. One man, Dev from the opposite cul-de-sac, had a binder of emails that Gloria had refused to acknowledge for over a year, each one requesting records of HOA expenditures. He handed it to me like it was evidence in a trial. She once fined me for having a non-compliant trash bin, he said. Same model as hers, just a different color. When I asked for the rule, she said it was a visual cohesion clause. There's no such thing in the bylaws. I passed the binder to Felix later that night. He was stacking paper like bricks, building a wall of evidence tall enough to bury the board in legal headaches. But Gloria wasn't going down without a fight. The next Monday, I received a letter via certified mail. It wasn't from her lawyer. It was from the HOA itself, a cease and desist. Apparently, by soliciting testimony and interfering with board operations, I was in violation of Section 4, Clause 8, of the Oak Ridge Community Conduct Code. It was signed by Todd, the same Todd who'd barely spoken a full sentence since the Porch incident. Felix read it and snorted. They're trying to intimidate you with a clause that applies to disruptive behavior at board meetings. You haven't attended a single one since this started. Can we use this against them? I asked. He nodded. Absolutely. It shows they're retaliating against a homeowner engaged in lawful discovery. That's textbook suppression. The next day, I finally heard from the county auditor's office again. This time, they weren't just requesting records from the HOA, they were issuing subpoenas. One for Gloria, one for Merrill, and one for the treasurer, who apparently hadn't signed a single check in 2 years despite being on paper as the one approving all expenditures. The treasurer's name was Alan, and he lived 3 doors down. I hadn't spoken to him much. He kept to himself, always mowing his lawn with headphones in. But when he saw me that afternoon, he waved me over. I didn't sign those checks, he said without preamble. She said I didn't need to. Told me it was a formality. She forged your signature? I asked. He nodded. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't want to cause problems. I pulled out my phone. Would you be willing to say that on record? He hesitated. Then he looked back at his house, where his wife was watering plants, watching him with a nervous expression. He turned back to me and nodded. Felix arranged a deposition 2 days later. Alan's statement changed everything. Now the investigation wasn't just about mismanagement, it was about forgery. The DA's office took it from there. They sent an investigator to Alan's house to collect handwriting samples and compare them to the HOA check endorsements. It didn't take long. Gloria had been writing out checks to a landscaping company owned by her cousin, except no work had ever been done. The invoices were fake. The money, over $20,000, had been siphoned out over 2 years. That night, 2 squad cars rolled up to her house just after sunset. Half the neighborhood watched from porches and windows as Gloria was led down her front steps in handcuffs. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't protesting. She looked stunned, like the world had stopped making sense. Merrill wasn't arrested, but she was served with a notice to appear. Todd disappeared entirely. No one saw him for 4 days, until his for sale sign went up. The following week, the county dissolved the Oak Ridge HOA's authority pending a full review. A temporary management trustee was appointed to oversee the neighborhood's finances and board operations. The first thing they did was halt all fines and fees until the audit was complete. I received a written apology from the trustee's office. Not from Gloria. But the letter came with a copy of the official audit summary, and in it was every fraudulent check, every forged signature, every complaint suppressed or ignored. A permanent record of what she'd done. Felix filed our civil case with the new trustee's blessing. With Gloria facing felony charges, her attorney folded fast. We settled out of court for full porch replacement, damages, legal fees, and a written admission that the fines she issued were fabricated. 2 weeks later, I stood on the frame of my new porch, hammer in hand, cedar dust in the air, watching the neighborhood come back to life. People were talking again, not whispering. Dogs ran freely across lawns without fear of leash citations. And kids were riding bikes down sidewalks no longer patrolled for chalk drawings. Gloria's house went up for sale the following month. The listing didn't mention the pending criminal trial or the lien placed on the property by court order to repay stolen funds. But everyone in Oak Ridge knew, and no one was going to forget. 3 weeks after Gloria's arrest, Oak Ridge was unrecognizable in the best way. The neighborhood had entered a state of cautious optimism, like a town recovering from a long drought. The fear that once hung over every mailbox and front porch had lifted, replaced by cautious conversations and the rustle of long-forgotten block parties being planned. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering behind hedges or tiptoeing around their own flower beds. The temporary trustee, an older gentleman named Marvin Renner, appointed by the county, had already made significant changes. He suspended all pending fines, reopened the community's financial records for public review, and scheduled town halls every other Friday at the rec center. His style was dry and methodical, but he listened and, more importantly, responded. I had no intention of running for anything, but somehow I ended up on the interim advisory board. Marvin insisted on including residents who had demonstrated a commitment to ethical transparency, and Felix, ever the strategist, nudged me into accepting. "You know the landscape better than anyone," he said over lunch one day. "And you know where the bodies are buried figuratively. I hope." My porch was fully rebuilt by then, better than before. I added a covered awning this time, with reclaimed iron brackets from an old barn upstate. The new structure had passed inspection without issue. I even received a written letter from the city applauding my cooperation during their investigation. Gloria's false report had triggered a deeper look at HOA abuse across the county, and Oak Ridge was now cited in briefings on reform. But the most unexpected twist came when Marvin invited me to review Gloria's HOA email logs, which had been turned over during the forensic audit. He wanted a second set of eyes, and since I was the only board member without ties to the old guard, I was the natural choice. At first, the messages were what you'd expect: reminders, budget spreadsheets, meeting minutes. But buried in an archived folder labeled "Compliance Do Not Share" were several emails that made my stomach turn. Gloria had corresponded with a private security contractor, not a licensed enforcement group, but a disbanded outfit once contracted by a neighboring industrial park for trespassing enforcement. The emails included payment confirmations, lists of residents to monitor, and even aerial photos of specific backyards taken by drone. I forwarded the emails to Felix immediately. "This is beyond overreach," he said after a long pause. "This is illegal surveillance." I called Officer Delgado and asked him to swing by the rec center the next day. When I showed him the emails, his jaw tightened. "This company's been on our radar for a while," he said. "They were shut down 2 years ago for operating without proper licensing. If she was still paying them under the table, she's in even deeper than we thought." Delgado took copies of the emails and began coordinating with the state licensing board. Within 48 hours, warrants were issued for the former contractor's CEO and 2 field agents. The surveillance equipment, repurposed from construction site monitoring, had been stored in a warehouse just outside city limits. According to the inventory logs, they'd been flying drones over Oak Ridge for over 8 months at Gloria's request. Residents who had received mysterious letters about fence encroachments or unauthorized gatherings were now learning those warnings had been based on illegally obtained images. At the next town hall, Marvin stood at the podium and read a formal statement from the county district attorney. Due to new evidence, the charges against Gloria Zimmerman have been amended to include conspiracy to violate privacy laws, unlawful contracting with an unlicensed agency, and misuse of community funds for illegal surveillance. The room burst into murmurs, some of disbelief, others grim satisfaction. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the faces shift from confusion to anger then resolve. Janice, the retired nurse who had first handed over the doctored newsletters, was seated near the front. She turned around, caught my eye, and gave a small nod. A quiet thank you, without words. It wasn't over, but the tide had fully turned. A month later, Gloria stood trial. The courtroom was packed: neighbors, reporters, even a few former HOA presidents from other districts who had likely come to see the fall of someone so notorious. Felix and I sat 2 rows back, behind Alan, the former treasurer, who was now one of the state's key witnesses. The prosecution laid out everything: the fraudulent fines, the forged signatures, the shell company payments to her cousin's landscaping business, and finally, the drone surveillance. The images, pulled from encrypted files, had been stored under resident names. Kids playing in pools. Couples having dinner on patios. One man changing a tire in his driveway. Gloria's attorney tried to argue that she believed the surveillance was legal under HOA common area enforcement rights, but the judge cut him off. There is no legal precedent that allows a homeowners association to spy on private property using unauthorized aerial surveillance, the judge said. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate and sustained abuse of power. In the end, Gloria was convicted on multiple counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful surveillance. She was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, with an additional 5 years of probation. Restitution was ordered, both to the community fund and to specific residents who had been targeted. The court also ordered the permanent dissolution of the Oak Ridge HOA as it had previously existed. In its place, a new neighborhood council was formed, voluntary, non-binding, and focused strictly on maintenance coordination and community events. I declined a leadership role but agreed to assist with the transition. Marvin stayed on as a consultant for 6 months to help us restructure. One afternoon, while we were reviewing some final paperwork at the rec center, he looked up from his notes. "You know," he said, "I've seen a lot of neighborhoods fall apart over bad boards. Usually it ends with half the residents selling and the rest fighting over whose dog barked first." I chuckled. "We came close. But you didn't fall apart," he said. "You pushed back. That matters." I looked out the window. Kids were drawing chalk cities on the sidewalk. Someone was grilling in their driveway. A woman was reading under a tree, her legs kicked up on a folding chair. "Yeah," I said. "We're still here." Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with no greeting, just a short typed message. "You should have just taken the fine." I folded it carefully, slid it into a folder marked "Resolved," and placed it in the back of my filing cabinet. Not because I was scared, because it reminded me of why I'd stood up in the first place. Not every fight ends in a big victory. But sometimes, if you're patient, methodical, and just a bit stubborn, the truth catches up. And when it does, it sticks.